everybody, my name is Jack and I'm here with Pastor Rob from the United Methodist Church in Jackson, Minnesota. And what is the sermon going to be about today?
Well, good morning, Jack. Good to see you again. Hey, we're going to be talking about how to share your faith this morning. How to talk about being a Christian as you believe it. And using the testimony of Paul, the Apostle Paul. And then we're going to use that to explain how do I give my testimony, or how do I talk about faith in Jesus. And so that's what it's all about this morning. Okay, thanks, Jack.
Thank you.
I had to make a point to say that my mother was here, and it's her fault. Actually, it's well, it's actually not her fault specifically. It's her dad's fault, my grandfather, who sweat all the time. That's why it is. And I'm one of the. I'm only there's two of us. My cousin Joe, who my mom's sister's son, who lives in Atlanta, Georgia, believe it or not. Can you imagine how much he sweats? And he and I are the only ones of my grandparents' grandchildren that inherited this profuse sweating. And my mother's a retired registered nurse. She says, "You're healthy, Rob. It means you're healthy." And I'm going, yeah. I'd rather be a little unhealthy than have to do with this and everything. But that's what's going on. And it's great to have you here, though. It's good to be together on a Sunday. I've been talking about sharing our faith and sharing. If you are a Christian, you know Jesus Christ is your Savior from sin. I've been talking about doing a little series on how to share your faith this summer. And in the end of July, we're actually going to have Joe and Renee, formerly Tlam, but Joe is going to come and share his testimony on the last Sunday in July. So we're gonna look forward to that. But you may be wondering, and have been wondering, we've been talking about how do I do that? And so this morning we're going to begin that series by looking at the Apostle Paul. And if you have your Bibles with you, and even if you don't, you can grab one from the end of the pews and turn to Acts chapter 26. Acts chapter 26. We are going to be looking at the testimony of the Apostle Paul and this morning. And those brown Bibles that you may see, they are the New Living Translation, the same translation I'm going to be reading from this morning. And so this is just to give you a little bit of a context here before I begin with reading verse 4. Paul is appearing before Festus, one of the Roman governors of the area, and he is giving his testimony because Paul has been beaten and has been accused of doing things against Caesar. And he has appealed as a Roman citizen. He has appealed his sentence, his situation to Caesar. And before you do that, you go to a lesser official and you give your testimony, or you give your side of the case. And so that's what he's doing here. And just to give you some context here. And then he says this, Acts chapter 26, beginning with verse 4. As the Jewish leaders are well aware, I was given a thorough Jewish training from my earliest childhood among my own people and in Jerusalem. If they would admit it, they know that I have been a member of the Pharisees, the strictest sect of our religion. Now I am on trial because of my hope in the fulfillment of God's promise made to our ancestors. In fact, that is why the 12 tribes of Israel zealously worship God night and day, and they share the same hope I have. Yet, Your Majesty, they accuse me for having this hope. Why does it seem incredible to any of you that God can raise the dead? I used to believe that I ought to do everything I could to oppose the very name of Jesus the Nazarene. Indeed, I did just that in Jerusalem. Authorized by the leading priests, I caused many believers there to be sent to prison. And I cast my vote against them when they were condemned to death. Many times I had been punished in synagogues to get them to curse Jesus. I was so violently opposed to them that I even chased them down in foreign cities. One day I was on such a mission to Damascus. armed with the authority and commission of the leading priests. About noon, your majesty, as I was on the road, a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shone down on me and my companions. We all fell down, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is useless for you to fight against my will. Who are you, Lord? I asked. And the Lord replied, I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get to your feet, for I have appeared to you to appoint you as my servant and witness. Tell people that you have seen me, and tell them that I will show you in the future. And I will rescue you from both your own people and the Gentiles. Yes, I am sending you to the Gentiles to open their eyes, so they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they will receive forgiveness for their sins and be given a place among God's people who are set apart by faith in me. And so, King Agrippa, I obeyed that vision from heaven. I preached first to those in Damascus, then in Jerusalem, and throughout all of Judea, and also to the Gentiles, that all must repent of their sin and turn to God, and prove they have changed by the good things they do. Some Jews arrested me in the temple for preaching this, and they tried to kill me. But God has protected me right up to this present time, so I can testify to everyone, from the least to the greatest. I teach nothing except what the prophets and Moses said would happen, that the Messiah would suffer and be the first to rise from the dead, and in this way announce God's light to Jews and Gentiles alike. Now this, right there at the end of verse 23, that's the end of Paul's testimony. But I love the next verse. If you have the New Living Translation, it's really cool. I like how they put it. Suddenly Festus shouted, Paul, you are insane. Too much study has made you crazy. I love that. Too much study has made you crazy. And it's interesting that that should be the next verse, because I was asked this past week at Bible study on Thursday morning. One of the folks said, Pastor Rob, you've studied this a lot. And I went, uh-oh, what does that mean? I don't know. But it's great. I mean, Festus is there with King Agrippa, and they're thinking, Paul, this is just, all this study about the Messiah and everything has just made you crazy. But what Paul is doing here is he's giving his testimony. He's giving the story of how he came to faith. And there are three parts to this. And if you ever, are asked to, think about it. If you're ever asked to give your testimony, there are basically three parts to it. The before, the what happened, and how it affected you. Easy, right? Let's look at it here. The before is verses 4 through 11. As the Jewish leaders are well aware, I was given a thorough Jewish teaching from my earliest childhood among my own people and in Jerusalem. Paul is saying, hey, even though I'm a Roman citizen, I'm a Jew. Jews could be Roman citizens under certain circumstances, and Paul was one of them, which meant he grew up going to synagogue. One of the things that we see a lot in people who talk about their faith, the first thing, if you ever ask somebody, well, do you know Jesus? Do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe Jesus died on the cross for you? And the first thing they say, well, I grew up in church. What does that mean? I grew up in church. What does that do? I mean, yes, you may learn some things, but the saddest thing I saw yesterday was a letter from the United Methodist Bishop in Northern California. There is one of the most famous churches in the United States is Glide Memorial United Methodist Church in San Francisco. It was settled way back when, or founded way back when. Some historic pastors in the Wesleyan tradition and the Methodist tradition have ministered there, have been the pastor there. They now have gone so far out of the Christian faith that the bishop finally had to write an open letter to everyone in California, and it circulated that she said, there are atheists and agnostics, there are Buddhists, and there are Muslims teaching in this church. She said, how do you know what you believe? What can you believe when you come to church? And it doesn't just matter. Now that's a United Methodist example, but I grew up going to a Baptist church, to a Presbyterian church. We went to a congregational church. My grandparents, the same grandparents I made fun of, kind of when they were in Glencoe, Minnesota. In Glencoe, Minnesota, there was a Baptist church and a small Baptist church, gigantic Lutheran church, and a gigantic Catholic church. But they grew up they had gone to a Methodist church. So where are you going? Well, everybody else went to the congregational church. But that congregational church, they had a Christian pastor who taught about Jesus Christ. And that's what Paul is getting at here. That's what Paul is doing here. He is saying, I grew up in church, going to synagogue all my life, and this is what I learned. And that's what a testimony is all about. It's not just about, okay, I'm a Christian because I went to the Methodist church. I hate to tell you this, but going to a Methodist church does not make you a Christian. The same, neither does going to a Baptist church or a Presbyterian church. That's not what makes you a Christian. Believing in the fact that Jesus lived, died, and rose again is what the definition of a Christian is. Jesus said himself, famous verse, we all probably, if you grew up in church in Sunday school, you probably memorized it. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever, what? Believeth. John 1:12. I came that whoever believes in me could be called the sons and daughters of God. That's what being a Christian is all about. And that's simply what Paul is doing here. He's remembering what he's been taught. And he was taught, oh goodness gracious, he's a lawyer. He's part of the Pharisees. He talked about studying a lot. That's what they did. They studied and studied and studied. And he refers to the Jews waiting for Jesus to come. And then, so that's his life beforehand. But then you see one day, verse 12, one day I was on such a mission to hunt down the Jews. That was my life beforehand. Armed with authority and commissioning of the leading priests about the noon. And Jesus met him on the road. Now I used to work at or volunteered with an organization called Teens Encounter Christ, TEC, or Interlakes Teens Encounter Christ near Madison, South Dakota. And every summer we would have a weekend when we would invite, it was an intense spiritual weekend where we would introduce young people to Jesus Christ. And as part of that weekend, other young people would give their testimony and talk about how Jesus had changed their life and how Jesus had influenced their life once they believed in him. But the problem with some of their testimonies was they gave such a powerful story about either child abuse, using drugs, using alcohol, doing horribly bad stuff in school, all of this other stuff, that everybody was focused on that. But if you notice the story here, Paul goes very quickly here, and he says, this is what happened to me. He doesn't linger on the fact that he's hunting down Jews, and then I was ready to go to Damascus, and I was going to go to this street and round up these Jews, and then go to that street and round up these Jews. He says, this is what I was doing. I was just on my way to Damascus. I had a warrant from the religious leaders. And then he says, one day I was on such a mission in Damascus, and about noon, your majesties, I was on the road, a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shone down on me and my companions. While we all fell down, I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is useless for you to fight against my will. Who are you, Lord? And the Lord replied, I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get to your feet, for I have appeared to you to appoint to you as my servant and witness. Paul makes it very clear. This is what Jesus has done. This is what I believe in Jesus. That's why we say, the Apostles' Creed in your hymnals. That's why the Apostles' Creed is not 3 pages long. The Apostles' Creed says, I believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son. That's it. That's it. It doesn't go into detail. And your testimony doesn't either. Have you ever, I was told this morning, somebody said, I mentioned what I was going to be talking about this morning. They said, now, Pastor Rob, don't go on tangents. Don't go on a tangent in your sermon. We'll be here forever. You know that. I've gone on these stories that go on forever. Well, the very fact is, Paul doesn't do that here. He says, this is the fact. This is what happened. And I can go on and on. When I came to Jesus, I was at home, and let's see, what else happened? And it was a warm day outside, and I had just come from Sunday school, and somebody told me about Jesus, and I can't remember what verse it was. What verse was it that I learned about Jesus that day that really started? And everybody's just doing like Jen is doing right now. Go, come on, let's go. It's not the point. The point is, you're talking about Jesus. I know that this is what Paul has been the same. Jesus met me on the road. He took my hand and lifted me up and made me right with him. You can see that. I love that. I love that in verse 16. He says, Jesus told him, now get to your feet. Now get to your feet, because here we go. And Jesus will use us. We don't exactly know how, but he does. And then finally we see what happened after he gave his life to Jesus. Starting in verse 19 through 23. I obeyed that vision from heaven. I preached first to those in Damascus, then in Jerusalem, and through all Judea, and also to the Gentiles, that all must repent and turn their sins and turn to God, and prove they are changed by the good things they do. Some Jews arrested me in the temple for preaching this, and they tried to kill me. But God has protected me right up to the present time, so I can testify to everyone, from the least to the greatest. I teach nothing except what the prophets and Moses said what would happen. That the Messiah would suffer and be the first to rise from the dead, and this way announce God's life to Jews and Gentiles alike. That's what happened after. So here's my life before. Here's my life. Oh, sorry. Here's my life before. I was a horrible person, but I grew up in the church. I knew about God. I was starting to learn about who the Messiah was. But I turned away from him. And here I am. Then the second part is, here I am in Damascus, or on the way to Damascus. And Jesus met me on the road and said, Saul, Saul. And then he took my hand and lifted me up and said, let's go, basically. I mean, it's a little bit more than that, but he said, let's go. And now, after I know Jesus, this is my life now. This is what I'm doing. This is where God has taken me and what God is doing through me. And where I've seen him happen. I bet you have stories like that. You know, the thing is that I've told you my testimony before. The fact is that I was not a drunk. I was not on drugs. I was not a horrible, terrible person. Now my mother's here. She can testify to that. My brothers might say something else. But at least you know that the fact of the matter is that I'm an average kid from South Dakota, this area of Minnesota. An average person. I'm not the best person. You know that. Can't sing right here and everything. Laughing his head off. But the thing is, I love Jesus. I know Jesus died on the cross for me. And what Jesus did was he put some people in my life that said, Rob, what do you like to do? Well, I like to teach. I like to talk in front of others. I like to visit with others. And they said, and these people said, well, Rob, you go talk to another person, Dr. Larry Hughes. And Dr. Larry Hughes at Orlesville Wesleyan College said, Rob, you should probably go into, and then I went to Christian education, and I went to seminary and became a pastor. That's my testimony. That's it. And God has hopefully used me ever since. Sometimes I wonder about it. Sometimes I wonder what God has next and what God is doing. But I know with Paul, look at that verse again in verse 22. Here's a key verse for believing in Jesus and then giving your testimony. But God has protected me right up to this present point. God is here. God knows what we're doing. God knows what you're doing in your life. And so over the next week we're going to talk about some things that people put in their testimony that kind of go, what in the world are you talking about? We're going to talk about some of those terms people use. And hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll have a couple people being able to say, yeah, I'll give my testimony. I'll be able to talk up here. I'm going to be right here with you. It's not, and we're not, how many people have guns with them? Or anything that they could throw at somebody? Not counting the hymnals in the pews. Well, the fact of the matter is, we're a family together. We should hear each other's stories. We should hear how God has worked in your life. I'd love to hear that. So let's get prepared for that. In the meantime, what are you going to tell others about it? Think about that. Let's pray together. Our Lord God, we thank you for the ways that you have used people throughout time to tell others and invite others. We're thankful, Lord, for the people that brought us here and nurtured us in our faith. Maybe there were Sunday school teachers, or maybe there were pastors, or maybe there were aunts or uncles or grandparents or our own parents or friends or whoever who said, do you know about Jesus? And we went, well, yeah, but Lord, thank you for helping and putting those people in our lives to tell us their testimony so that we could come to you, so that we could understand who you are in our lives. Thank you for the Apostle Paul and his testimony that affected and led to basically the Christian church in the Western world. One man reaching out and then multiplying that over and over again. Helping us, Lord, to trust you to do the same with our lives and our testimonies. Thank you for your help and your hand always lifting us up. In Jesus' precious name we pray. Amen.